The Phoenix Suns have continued to narrow down their list for their head coaching position. And yesterday, there's really only one guy I trust when it comes to sourcing and who in the world is actually going to get a job and breaking news and things that I believe. John Gambadoro yesterday came out with his opinions on the Phoenix Suns head coaching candidacy, and what I thought was funny about it was he always leans into which guys he's got some good sourcing on. And the four guys that he was talking about were Chris Quinn, Mike Norrie, as well as Sean Sweeney of the Dallas Mavericks, and then a wild card per se of Johnny Ott. Now, I've talked about all these guys, but one of the things about it is I kind of have to move off of my opinion of Johnny Bryant being this guy because I'm just not sure it's going to happen at this point, especially with the one guy I trust in the Arizona sports media basically saying he doesn't have enough information, which leads me to believe that Johnny Bryant's probably not the front runner. So you have to move off of that. I'm not just going to stick with it because it's probably wrong. Sean Sweeney, I think, is a fine hire. Same with Jordan Ott. People who are just pointing out that Jordan Ott is from Michigan State, so he's going to get the job, that's kind of nonsense. Because the issue with Brian Gregory is he wasn't qualified for the position of general manager. Jordan Ott is qualified. I don't care if he's from Michigan State. I care about his qualifications. People hire people all the time in this business just because they know them. I don't really care about that. It's you could know them, but are they also qualified? Guys, I work in a business right now that if you are like in the sports business where if you're someone's uncle, if you're someone's nephew, you get a job. And that's what drives me insane because most of the time they're not qualified. You're looking at someone in this business who I don't have any uncles or cousins or brothers or sisters that work in this business. It's just me digging myself out of this hole. So oftentimes I get passed up for guys that are less qualified because they have a relative in that situation. So I don't really care about that. Jordan Ott is overly qualified. If you don't think every general manager is hiring their buddy to some sense, you're crazy. That's unfair to Matt Ishbia. The issue is, are they qualified? And every single guy on this list and the guys that Gambo is leaning into are all qualified. And so when it moves over to who am I falling more for than others, Micah Norrie was also a guy, the Timberwolves assistant coach, who was the interim head coach during the playoffs last year when Chris Finch couldn't stand on the sidelines because he broke his leg. So I'm still in on Micah Norrie. But I should have talked more about Chris Quinn. And I didn't even mention him yesterday. But the Phoenix Suns need a culture. And Chris Quinn brings a culture to this team. This Suns head coaching search, they could go after a lot of different avenues, but they need a Monty Williams type. Also, a former player that would be able to connect with these players. Now, Chris Quinn, a former player, a guy who played for the Miami Heat, a journeyman in his own right, never a outstanding player, but sometimes those guys make the best head coaches. Tyronn Lue wasn't anything in the NBA, goes and coaches, and we all agree he's probably a top 5 coach in the NBA. That's who we all wanted last year for this job or 2 years ago. So the more I think about it, the more Chris Quinn, it would be an absolute home run to hire him as the Phoenix Suns head coach. He has been a longtime assistant and an assistant with the Miami Heat. When we talk about the best head coaches in the NBA, we say Spoelstra, we say Brad Stevens when he was in that realm, we say Popovich when he was still there, we say Steve Kerr. Eric Spoelstra is still in that tier 1 echelon of head coaches. And if you can rip off any piece of that, You have to. And so when you're talking about Chris Quinn, who has earned the right to move up through the Miami Heat. First, he was through development. Then he was assistant coach. Now he's an associate head coach. He has continued to move up the ladder, and he's still young. You know, we talk about the Mark Dagnalds and Chris Finches and, you know, the Tom Thibodeaus and J.B. Bickerstaffs and all those good level head coaches. Chris Quinn is set up for success. And when you're talking about someone who can relate to the players because he was a player, that I think would work really well. But more than anything, if there's any culture I would love to rip a piece off of and bring it to Phoenix, it is Miami. That makes a lot of sense where you bring Heat culture to Phoenix, take a piece of that from Miami, and build your own culture here. Not only do I think that's something that would work really well for this team, but he's also worked in player development. I believe Chris Quinn falls in line with what Brian Gregory wants to do. And you're talking about that alignment, right? You're talking about everyone being on the same page. That is what I think the Phoenix Suns need to do. You know, I have kind of glossed over Chris Quinn because I never really thought it was a actual thing that could happen. But apparently he wowed the Suns in his interview. Again, from the Miami Heat, has been mentored under Eric Spoelstra for a decade at this point, worked his way up through the Miami Heat coaching hierarchy, player development, assistant head coach, now associate head coach. Not only does he deserve a job and is highly qualified, that should be the Suns' number one option for a head coach. Because when you're talking about building a culture for this team that has not had one over the past couple of seasons, you need to bring in a Monty Williams type with someone who can deal with these players, relate to these players, but also have the ability to do more than what Monty Williams did on the X's and O's. Because he wasn't a great X's and O's head coach. He was a really good connector, relator. If he could do both like Eric Spoelstra does, that's what the Phoenix Suns need to do. So I've changed my allegiances. I'm changing it from Johnny Bryant, Mike Nori, any one of those guys, right? I don't mind if any of these guys got hired. Jordan Ott, Sean Sweeney, Johnny Bryant, Mike Nori. But I can't forget about the culture. I can't just forget about what the Phoenix Suns need X's and O's wise and getting to that championship level. I need someone that can relate to the players. And for someone like Chris Quinn, who has been under Heat culture for not only as a assistant, but also as a player, that bodes really well for me for someone who is just looking for the Suns to figure out that level of, I just said the word and I forgot it. Just to be able to find out that level of culture. Suns need that.